On February 19, 2026, the President of the United States began an unprecedented new chapter in UFO disclosure by announcing the White House's support and mandate to the Department of War to reveal the hidden knowledge of UFO contact with planet Earth. Since then, 4 tranches of UFO documents and videos have been released on war.gov/UFO, racking up 1.7 billion hits worldwide since the site's launch on May 8th. As the entire world watches in anticipation, something deeper is boiling in the background, about to strike at the heart of humanity. This will redefine the beliefs and stories we tell ourselves about our origin, place, and destiny in the cosmos. I call it the new UFO religion. It's where the ancient myths overlap with modern UFO contact cases and the people coming from outer space. Are human religions based on contact with beings from the stars? Are these beings truly gods and angels, or are they mortal extraplanetary civilizations guiding humanity through the epochs of time? As the world religions prepare to reinterpret their sacred text to fit the reality that we are not the only civilization amongst the stars, Planetary HQ is on a journey to show you the rise of a new spiritual movement and the candid conversations taking place now amidst your religious communities. How will disclosure affect the masses? Let's hear it from the people themselves.
Planetary HQ, baby.
Thank you for joining this talk. This was actually an impromptu, got put on the schedule last night, and tonight we are going to the stars. So my name's Taylor. I go by Taylor Verser on the internet. That last name is sort of a brand name, sort of pointing to a mix of 2 different things, which is universe, we're universers, we're in the universe. And then also, obviously, so verse as in, the stanzas, the old text, the new text, the spirituality written on paper. So that's what that term is kind of referencing. And the topic of tonight's talk is Faith Beyond Earth, Cosmic Christianity, and the question of extraterrestrials. So the way I want to open this up is kind of set the stage, set the premise for why this is a relevant topic. And then once I'm kind of set that, I'm going to bring up some discussion questions, and I might even just turn off the mic and bring the circle in a little bit, because I want to hear from you guys, because there's a lot of topics and sort of tangents from this, and I'd like to hear everyone's thoughts. So to give the synopsis right now, when I say UFOs, what are your guys' first reaction? On the scale of fringe to, yeah, I think that might be real, where are you? Right hand if you think that's still pretty fringe, or left hand if you're considering like, yeah, I'm open to that. Okay, so left, open to it, a little bit of both. Left hand, open to it. Okay, with a lot of open, a couple people are like, not sure, maybe you haven't heard much about it. So, that was me. I think most people are like that. They haven't heard enough to really make an informed decision. But a lot of people are open to the possibility of life because at least we're here. But the modern, perspective in terms of the mainstream, maybe academia, would tell you that the chance of life is low, because they're using equations like the Drake equation to estimate the likelihood of intelligent life on other planets, which is more based on, the physics understanding of how planets form, and it doesn't, it's not really an equation on the chance of life if the life programs are managed by intelligent beings, right? It's more of a question of free will. Are the beings that organize the life patterns in the universe? Normally we just assign that to God, but we also know there are a lot of other spiritual beings talked about even in the Bible and all the world religions. So, the roles that those beings also play within this vast universe, could potentially apply here. So the next part of this is there's a lot of action going on about UFOs in the U.S. government right now, and Congress members are getting involved. They're writing laws about this subject, and the reason for that is there's a lot of military talk about what they call unidentified aerial phenomena, right? So they rebranded it. They call it UAP now. Now, that's partly to take away some of the stigma, because it's been a bit in the conspiracy sector for a really long time. But the reason Congress members are taking this seriously and they're having select security subcommittee hearings. Does anyone like watch those at all? There's like different issues that come up. They basically keep the government in check in different factions. Like, oh, there was a misuse of power here, and we got to make laws to make sure this doesn't happen again. So there's been 2 significant hearings about the UAP subject. And what's different about these hearings is that the military whistleblowers who are on the stand, sort of sworn under oath, are telling the U.S. congressmen and women that there are crash retrieval programs of off-world technology, which include alien bodies, which is how they know that the craft are from other civilizations. And so they're saying this on the record. You can watch the videos. I'd love to get people's emails if you're interested, and I'll forward you these hearings going on because it's some really interesting statements, and it's coming from people who are definitely in the military. Their background isn't in question. And so you have to question, and this is what Congress is questioning, how is this true? How could this have been true for so many years, and yet it's been such a thing on the fringe that has been considered, a Hollywood, a fiction. So that's what's going on right now. A lot of interesting talks, and like I said, there's a lot of laws being written because Congress is essentially being told we're spending unknown millions of dollars on programs with technology not from this planet. And that alone is enough to make them say, hey, we need to get that money in check. But on the larger scale, I think it's also a bipartisan issue. The Congress people that are involved in pushing this forward on both the left and the right, because it does hit deep to the core of the human experience of are we alone in the universe. So that's the premise of today's discussion. Like I said, I think this is the most interesting world news happening sort of under the radar, but I also tell people I only follow galactic politics, not necessarily the Earth politics. So I think we all have to choose where we can participate the most so that we don't feel like because it's so easy to latch on to how bad things seem around us. But if you can find the one thing that you can work on that inspires you to make society around you better, I think that's the way that we can all kind of work as a collective and play our part. So this is the unique role I've chosen to play. It's a passion that I developed at the end of high school. So yeah, we're going to get into the open-ended sort of questions here. But actually, I guess I'll open it up first. And I have this microphone I'm passing around as well. I'd love to get your questions sort of recorded to start building like an idea of how people are thinking about this. So if y'all are willing to participate, I'll hand this to you. You can definitely say no, and then we'll all kind of talk together. So are there any initial questions that come up for you guys about this subject? And this could just be in general, or it could start to get into the philosophy and the theology and the effect on religion. What's some top level questions that you guys, are thinking?
For me, there's a huge amount of space in between the concept of UFOs or UAPs and alien life.
Sure.
I'm pretty familiar with the Drake equation. And given that there are 2 trillion galaxies that average 400 billion stars in each one, the likelihood that there is alien life somewhere out there, even sentient, like technological life like ours, is actually pretty high.
Oh, okay.
It approaches 100%.
Okay.
Given enough, the numbers are just so high.
Yeah.
Whether they can get here is a much bigger question in my head. I don't know. I don't know what to make of the people who testify that they have experienced certain things. One of the things you said I really need to comment on. I have a daughter in the military.
Okay.
Being in the military does not make you a credible witness.
Okay. Yeah.
In and of itself. I mean, the military is full of all kinds of people. The military is a very diverse community of people.
Yeah.
And you've got people that make shit up.
Yeah, I hear you.
The military, same as anywhere. The number of reports makes me think, they're seeing something.
Yeah.
And, the radar, of course, is seeing something. And so I'm open to the possibility that they've gotten here somehow.
But you'll need some more evidence.
To me, that's a whole different subject than whether they exist somewhere in the cosmos.
Got it. Well, thank you so much, and I appreciate you filling me in on some of the Drake equation. So I guess you're saying the Drake equation has a high possibility that, yes, at least one of them out there, because there's so many, does have life. Is that...
The Drake equation is a whole series of things, they're variables that you would multiply together to get the probability itself.
Okay.
So for example, how many planets there are. Until recently that was unknown. Now we know that about half the stars in our galaxy that we can detect planets around have planets around them.
Okay.
Then you multiply that by the percentage of those planets that are within the zone that could allow for our kind of life to arise. So they have to be in the sweet spot, the sweet distance from their star, whatever that is. And that has a certain probability. And it's pretty low.
Okay.
And, half of the stars have planets, a very small number of planets are in the right zone. And then, you have all these things that you multiply. What is the percentage of habitable planets that have single-celled life forms? Well, we don't know that, but we can make some guesses and sort of speculate what that number might be. And there's a range, it could be really, really small, or it could be pretty high. Anyway, there's the Drake equation is maybe 15 or 16. I should look it up.
Yeah.
But it's a bunch of these probabilities, and when you multiply them all together, you get the probability that there's life out there. And again, given the huge numbers that you start with, even if the probability in any one galaxy is low, the probability that there's at least one in all of them is quite high.
Awesome. Thank you. Was there another initial comment, Stephanie?
Well, I know when you asked the question, are there UFOs? And when I look up in the sky, of course, there's life on other planets. Look how many beautiful stars and planets there are. And I'm wondering about the evidence. I also think about all the evidence or the myths and legends from other cultures.
Okay, yeah.
The Mayans, the Hindus, and their pictures of Krishna have little spaceships in the background.
Yeah, the Vimanas, I think.
Right,
them,
and people in India accept that. So I'm just thinking, what evidence? I haven't educated myself, so I'm interested in that. But my answer is, of course, there has to be. We're alive. We're walking. We're alive.
I guess,
just
that might be the
itself.
best evidence.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
If I could just quickly.
Yeah.
I've often thought about this question because, and I've wondered why religious folks aren't talking about it more, and I think it's just too overwhelming to think we understand what salvation is, and yet if we really believe it to be universal salvation, then what do we really know of the universe? So, and I think that it's just too mind-blowing for people to even allow themselves the sliver of thought that it might be possible.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's an important question. That's definitely on my list. I'll make a small comment, and I think we're going to come back around to that, because that's one of the important theological implications that might start to make people be like, I don't know if I want to go that deep, because if I think that other life in the universe is real, then I need to re-look at, the concepts of salvation, and even like, well, what if in the Bible we have the story of Adam and Eve, and they fall, and that's the sort of original sin doctrine that gets created. What if that's how it really is? What if there's other planets that didn't have that fall experience, and then salvation for them is maybe different or not necessary or something? So you can already see the trains of thought that come up from this within religious context. So that's a really important. And your name, Chris? Thank you, Chris. Any other initial thoughts on this?
I'm Monica, and I'm a veteran.
Thank you. Thank you for your service.
And yes, yeah, of course there are. So, no, I'm making up shit. No, there aren't. But I was in MI and in military intelligence. Even though I was a private, it's not like they're gonna tell us something or they're gonna listen to us. But I saw enough just big, bare tip of icebergs of things. That any conspiracy theory, which is what some people call it could be true. Could be true. Now, then I have personal experiences decades ago where if I had them today, I'd say it was a drone in the sky, or something. But decades ago, I'm sure there are other sentient life forms, and they probably know about us, just like the wild things of the wild know that where we are on a hiking trail before we know. But I'm kind of torn. I'm torn between really feeling like I know, and then I want there to be Earthling exceptionalism.
Okay.
Where we were made special and we're it.
Got it. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that Earth special concept has also been a traditional concept, so it might be sort of ingrained in us in a subconscious way. There was a time when Galileo was persecuted for saying the sun did not revolve around the Earth, that it was the Earth revolving around the sun. So there's a theological story that has been sort of told that Earth is the center of God's creation, and it can be, I guess, conflicting if we consider that we're not the only creation. Does that mean we get less attention from God? Obviously not. God's omnipresent, omnipotent, but still, conceptually speaking, it feels like it changes the story of creation a bit. Any other initial comments?
I think God created everything. He created the whole universe. He created these other planets. He created the aliens. He created everything. And I do believe that aliens are here. I am thankful that they are more advanced than we are, and hopefully they are peaceful. They must be peaceful because they haven't destroyed us yet. So I just and hopefully, if we really knew about them, or if the military really knew about them, or where they were, they would destroy them because we are so backward.
I wasn't going to share anything, but you just inspired me. And what inspired me in what you just said, that if there is another life form and that's more advanced than us, it's more peaceful, I just wanted to really kind of confirm that, because the more advanced consciousness will be more unity consciousness, and in that there is going to be less division, because what it is that we see as lack of peace is when we see this or that, the duality, and not actually recognizing that there is not this or that, it's all the same thing. It's just like hold this. So it's like holding this and putting a line between half like this and saying that this half is different from this. But the truth of the matter is, when you just remove this, you realize it's all one. And the higher level we go, the more this disappears. And so if the life forms out there are more advanced in consciousness, and this is the key because it's about consciousness, if they are more advanced in consciousness than us, there is absolutely more peace. I just wanted to, so thank you for the inspiration.
Yeah, I certainly hope that if these other civilizations have interstellar craft that can make these long distances, that would be incredible enough. But hopefully, to get to that technological level, it would mean they would not have destroyed themselves through conflict, maybe at least not a worldwide destruction. And who knows? There's a lot of other implications of the technology. But one thing you said is that, right now we're so warlike and antagonistic even between nation states. it would be a sort of like a trophy to get these craft if they were going in our atmosphere. And that is another aspect to what some of these specific whistleblowers are talking about, that the U.S. military has programs to not only retrieve crashed craft, but to sometimes take them out of the sky, which is definitely, I mean, the military, the airspace, they protect it very well. It's important national security. But I think it's also important to understand that we don't want to just take the military perspective of the national security threat, that we need to fear what we don't know. Because if these beings are intelligent, we need to use the best of human ethics to decide how we're going to interact with them. Because all of the worst traits of humanity and arguments that deal just because we look different from and think different from each other, could easily be multiplied if we were thrown in the mix with the cosmic interstellar highway of different civilizations. And I think that's more about the spiritual and moral and ethical culture. So I'm really glad that Wild Goose is a place that is pioneering all those factors. So I think we'll move on to the next kind of set of questions. We actually covered a couple things that I already had written down. You talked about the level of consciousness. Hopefully, beings, if they're coming here, they're a more unified civilizations. What do you guys think of this? So, we get this concept that the image of God is in man. There's this phrase that God says in Genesis, I think, is "Let us make man in our image." Some people even wonder, why is God saying us? Why is there a plural term used there? And some people would say, maybe it's the Trinity. Well, it's like, the Trinity concept, was it actually fully that developed that long ago in Genesis? Did they know about the Trinity when they were writing that? Another concept that I think a really important theologian named Michael Heiser brings up is he points out that in the Old Testament there's something known as, that he calls the divine council. And what it really is sort of God, Yahweh, at the top of a sort of spirit council of spirit beings. And the word they use for this is Elohim in the sort of initial original Hebrew text. And sometimes this is meaning a plural term, or sometimes it could be a singular term. But this is another concept that sort of goes into the role of spiritual beings in the administration of creation. And also, even angels, I guess you could argue, are a form of extraterrestrials. There's similarities in the story of angels that is similar to humanity, particularly the aspect of free will. We get shadows of a story of this angelic rebellion that John talks about a lot, and is also personified in the form of Satan, these spiritual beings, spiritual warfare. I guess they have free will too, but we mostly consider that in some other spiritual dimension that I guess overlaps. What's that? Yeah, go ahead. The Book of Eli.
What Eli has information too about these other beings that came to the earth. And
now you said the Book of Eli. Is it the Book of Enoch?
Enoch.
Enoch.
What am I saying?
Enoch. Eli.
Yeah.
The Book of Eli, I think, is a movie.
Enoch.
Yeah. Enoch. The Book of Enoch.
Yeah,
yes.
The guy that lived the longest of any person.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. This is a really important book, I think, to understand, and the Book of Enoch also expands a lot on that mysterious passage that talks about the sons of God coming to the daughters of men, the Watchers, the Nephilim, this race of mighty men of old. Some people say they were giants. In the modern UFO field, some people are arguing that, what if that was an extraterrestrial event of inclusion with humanity? So that's another topic. And do you have anything else about the Book of Enoch? Yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
Well, we just shared what came forward for me. I went to India and I got to travel into kind of like a rural part of India, and in that place they have ruins of these beautiful temples, and at the same time they also the people that live in that area are really kind of like uncivilized. I mean, if you look at the ruins, it looks like way more advanced compared to how these people live here now today in 2017. And when you come to that village, for example, and they run up to you like I'm an American. I have an accent, the special Russian American accent, and so I'm kind of like coming as American, right? And they run up to me like don't touch you, like, and all of a sudden it just appears. It's like I'm an alien from like a more civilized world, and they kind of look at you like, what planet are you from? And all of a sudden I'm like, this kind of looks like maybe these aliens came here and they built these temples, and when you see all these deities in the temples, because maybe they were just, like from another continent that's more developed, right? They came because for some reasons, whatever, some apocalyptic event happened and they had to move to that area. And I don't know how many of you have been in India and you see all these strange kind of like deities, and it just really looked like maybe they were not even necessarily aliens, maybe they were from just other continents, or maybe they were. But the people who live there, I'm not kidding, they live like, it's, I don't know, not even 1920s, like 1700s or something. I mean, like really not advanced, let's just say it that way.
Yeah, and of course we do have the retrogressive part of our own civilization. We don't know how we built the pyramids, although some people say aliens also built those. So it could be that. I think the deepest evidence is still probably the fact that there are all these beings that even look different, are taller, multi-arms. We don't know what is a metaphor or what was an actual real being that actually stood in front of people that instructed them, maybe taught them, and what were their origin story? They have the UFOs in the they call them the Vimanas that we talked about earlier, the flying craft. So it's hard to really take those stories seriously, I think, because often we'll be like, oh, that's just the mythology of another religion, and then for some religions they'll just kind of write off any other religion. But to bring it back, even within the Bible, there's a lot of mysterious information that sort of gets glossed over. Ezekiel's another popular account where he talks about this wheels within wheels and fiery chariots. So you go, how would an ancient man or woman, mankind, how would they describe and write something down? They considered a celestial event, the stars came down. How would they record that? How would that story get passed on? But what if it was like a technological event with a species sometimes landing or just in the craft? So I think that's definitely a relevant topic of study that could be cross-correlated between different religions. The last thing I'll mention here, and do you have something you want to add? Yeah.
Just same thing with the Mayans, and there's pictures of, they look like aliens, but also the Hawaiians, the chiefs that united, they're a group of 8 foot tall giants, kind of. Okay. And they had Kamehameha that you might hear about.
Yeah.
He has a birth history like Moses, but they said the person who would unite the islands could lift up this so many ton rock, which he did. And they also, when you see Hawaiians, they give respect. And there's, where they came from, origin chants and origin oral history from different parts of the universe. And so when you see a Hawaiian, like a traditional ceremony, they'll have the conch shells. Mm-hmm. And they do it to all 4 directions. And they're actually giving love to each of the 4 directions of the universe. They're giving love. And I think that's a nice tradition. I like to do that too.
Yeah. There's a show that is out on Apple TV called Chief of War, and it's about that Hawaiian story, the different the different tribes on Maui, Hawaii, Oahu, or something. And it's a really, really great film, and it has that character Kamehameha. It focuses. He's one of the main characters. I wanted to add that there are cultures like the Native Americans who will straight up tell you that they know that that beings came from the stars and taught them. That's in their oral history. It's in their traditions, and they still have a great respect for what they learned from them, and they consider them star brothers. And how do we reconcile with that? Sometimes it's like the story is so in our face, but we need a modern, example. So I'm hoping that through what's currently happening in government, we can sort of get the information that we're looking for, because I think it will have a lot of inspiration behind the discussions that pop up and how we look at ourselves in the universe. So let's keep going here. Yeah. Oh, nice.
And the reason I say it is I had a friend who was an astronomy major, and this was in the early 90s, and he said that it was an infinitesimally small percentage chance that there would be life on other planets.
Okay.
Because of what they put in some of those variables.
Yeah.
And now that the variables have changed, that's why the outcome has changed, right?
Oh, wow.
So now we know there are a lot of other planets in other galaxies. There are a lot of other stars that have planets. There are going to be then a certain percentage of planets that have that are in that perfect zone. So now the same person that told me that at the time said now it's practically certain that there is other life in other places because of the way they've changed the way that what they put in those.
Yeah, no, and that's a perfect example where it's like we're using the same equation, but the data points for each sort of variable have changed. And I think obviously that's important. We need better data. The more we will find, the better data we give it, the more we'll see the chances in how abundant life could be in the universe. We talked about earlier. Chris brought up the concept of salvation and sin, and what exactly would be the implication of the story of Jesus, and the whole concept behind that. There's a lot of doctrines in philosophy and theology. I want to get a raise of hands here. So how many here would associate themselves with the Christian theology? I know it's here at this festival there's a lot of progressive thoughts here, but Christian definitely nice. Yeah, we got like a lot here in the group. Okay. She said she also believes in reincarnation, which I've heard some people say that even in some of the Jewish traditions that is a topic that some of them believed as well. So it could be something that was cut out of not taught at some point, or was a small subset. That's an interesting topic, but you want to add something?
Is your question referring to traditional interpretation of Christianity, or more of the idea of the universal Christ and believing in?
Yes. So thank you for bringing it up. So she's talking about, well, are you talking about the more traditional fundamentalist Christianity, the four kind of main doctrines, or the sort of modern you use the term universal Christ, and this is an important kind of distinction, because when we're talking about this question of if there's other life, how do they get saved? What is their sort of growth of spirituality? What are the necessities? I guess with the traditional theology, the biggest question is, well, if Jesus had to come to this planet to die so that we could be saved and go to heaven, then does Jesus need to go to every planet and die so that people can go to heaven? And then I guess on the other side we got the universal Christ, which I think partly it could be the concept. I'm not super deep into that. I know Richard Rohr is one author that talks about this, but from the top of my head, and maybe someone can chime in on this, that universal Christ idea, is it that Jesus' death here then was applied universally and then could save any of the other civilizations? Or is it more that the Christ consciousness is the saving factor, but it's not that Christ was dying on the cross to save us, it was that his teachings basically save us spiritually from sort of spiritual darkness or like a lower consciousness? Is that a correct sort of description?
Well, what I want to say is, I'm not going to speak into what we know kind of like historically, religiously, but I will speak more in the metaphor and more in the psychological drama of Jesus, not even Jesus, Christ dying on the cross and for our sins and being reborn to eternal life. So in the spiritual psychology sense, and what I have actually discovered mathematically, and it was just downloaded to me, that it is actually, if the Christ is within us, and that is our true self, our higher self, it is necessary for us to die to the sins of the false beliefs, misbeliefs, misidentifications, judgments, of all the misinterpretations, all of that is not true, is necessary for us to die to that in order for us to be reborn at a higher level of consciousness. And it is necessary step, and it's continuous. So it's not something that happens one time and that's it, but it's a continuous evolution of dying to sin, which is that is false, and be born into something that is more truth. And this more truth is still not all truth, so you still have to die again towards false and be born to a higher truth and a higher truth and a higher truth. And so in that way, it was actually really affirming, wow, in that sense, he really died for our sins. You have to die for your sins to be born to an eternal truth. So once again, I'm not speaking for Jesus particularly and the theology. I'm speaking that psychologically and mathematically it confirms to exactly the theology that is being taught.
Got it. No, I really appreciate you sharing that. That's definitely, I think that's applicable, because even like you have different phases of your life, and oftentimes maybe someone starts spiritual, they go away from the church, and then they sort of come back after a rediscovery period, and that's a sort of like maybe two deaths, you know, the death of the religious upbringing, and then the death of maybe an atheist phase, and then sort of being reborn with a spiritualized consciousness, and yet again. So I like that philosophy and understanding. Where else could we go with this? Oh, I want to shout out, we have here Steve Finland here with us, and I've been hanging out with Steve for this weekend. He's an author, and he actually has some books on what's called the atonement doctrine, which specifically unfolds the question of the salvation concept. What exactly is necessary for salvation? Because obviously in the traditional fundamental Christian theology, the necessity for salvation is that you believe that Jesus died for your sins so that you could be forgiven. And I don't know, Steve, is there anything you can kind of help bridge us the gap? So in terms of like, okay, extraterrestrial civilizations, salvation, and also the atonement doctrine.
One or two things.
Yeah.
Okay, to me,
Sure.
and of course we're all speaking for ourselves, but
Okay.
to me, the idea that Jesus died, well, I don't accept that salvation comes through a death as a payment. Your idea is more psychological and more experiential. But the doctrine that he paid off human sins through a death is not something I accept. even if I did accept it, I would find it absurd to think that he died for the sins of people on other planets, because how would they know? And I also would find it even more absurd to think he would have to go to each planet and die on each planet. So I think you mentioned the cosmic Christ raising, or maybe it was you, raising our consciousness, raising our spirituality is the term I would use. I think salvation is a matter of spiritual growth. Jesus uses the image of growth all the time.
Just hold the mic a little bit
growing
closer.
like a mustard seed. He says the kingdom of heaven is like a plant that the farmer sows, and it grows overnight. He does not know how. It grows first the stalk, then the ear, and then the full grain in the ear. But the farmer doesn't know. In other words, spiritual growth is unconscious, or superconscious, you might say. But so spiritual growth is the point he comes back to over and over again, and I think salvation is linked to spiritual growth. Again, my opinion is Jesus' saving power is the same as his creative power. We're told 5 places in the New Testament that he actually created this world. So I say in my books that his saving power is the same as his creator power, and it's also the same as his healing power. Because if you can create a world, it's not that extraordinary that you could heal the blind. Creating a world is even harder than healing the blind.
Sure, yeah.
So anyway, that's part of my teaching.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
And there are scriptures where it says God made many worlds, made all the worlds.
Okay.
There are scriptures that say that. And I think we're saved into wholeness, or into a oneness, or a sozo, or a restoration, or knowing our fuller selves in God. Like I heard in one workshop that we're all the fishes, but God is the sea. So we're all in it and surrounded by it. And just for kicks, I think if Jesus died for our sins, which I'm very watery about, but he did it once and for all of everything, the entire universe. And I went Star Wars with that, thinking of Yoda. Like Yoda's still Yoda to all, anyway.
I'd like to hear more about Yoda, but we'll keep moving on.
What I'm about to share is not something that I agree with or subscribe to, but it's another perspective that bears on the question of whether Jesus died for people on other worlds. And that is, before we really knew a whole lot about astronomy, the Mormons believe that Jesus, this is the foundation of Mormon faith, is that after his crucifixion and resurrection in the Middle East, he came over to the North American continent, and I don't know the story well enough. I don't think he died here. I don't think he was killed or crucified. But it's fundamental to the Mormons that Jesus did go and visit other lands to bring his message to them. So if the Mormons are right, then I think they might make an argument that, of course, he visited other worlds as well.
Yeah, very interesting concept. Yeah, I have heard that concept with Mormonism. Definitely an interesting topic. Huh. Okay. Well, I do hope that maybe the life, maybe Jesus' story was broadcast to the universe. Maybe that's like a sort of middle ground. There was a cosmic TV, and they got to see his message here. But yeah, I think that covers. Is there any other comments here? I know. So you can, if you're feeling like a bit overwhelmed, or just like, whoa, this alien thing goes as deep as now we're talking about atonement and what Jesus dying on the cross meant, you're right there with everyone else once this question hits them and they start diving in. These are the types of conversations that come up once you start believing that we are not alone. So thank you everyone for participating in that question. I know that's like once you get into fundamentals, sometimes it can get a little hairy, and but we have a lot of different enlightening opinions here. So that's super awesome.
I have to leave. Rabia wanted to give you that.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, and what's your book called? Do you want to just shout it out?
In the bookstore, I have a book called Salvation Not Purchased, and 2 other books. I don't want to hog the time, but thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Steve.
Yeah, I wish I could stay. This is really cool. Yeah.
Okay, and it looks like we have an open heart prayer that maybe is like a meditation that we could do at the end. Awesome. Well, is everyone having fun so far? Is there nice? You like it? 6:50. Yeah. Do we want to wrap it up? Yeah. Perfect. I didn't know how much time we wanted to go for. Okay, so let's see. There's some. Let's see. Oh, here's like kind of an interesting one. Is the Bible a uniquely human covenant or one chapter in a larger cosmic revelation? So part of the question, I guess, there is, do extraterrestrials have their own scriptures, you could say? What are their sources of truth? And how might that sort of interact? If we were interplanetary civilization, if we had open contact with other civilizations, how would you guys kind of go about, like, imagine we get so far as to talk about belief systems, and now we're talking to extraterrestrials. How would you try and begin to assess their theology and philosophies of the universe? If there's any thoughts on that. I know we got the Star Trek shirt here. I don't know if you have anything you want to chime in. What'd you say? Yeah. Nothing? No ideas? Okay. No worries.
I haven't figured this. This book and this one.
You want to, say that out?
I still have lots of mystery of the world and the people in the world in mystery, much less other worlds.
Yeah. You're talking about like the world religions, all of them, like trying to understand and really piece it all together. Yeah, the whole earth as exactly. And wow, I mean, I guess any mystery between trying to sift through all the earth religions would only just get compounded when we're looking at extraterrestrial religions. Unless the extraterrestrial religions would help us if they're older civilizations, or if their philosophy starts to overlap with some of ours, maybe it would put into context some things that have been universally developed throughout multiple religions here on the planet. That would be interesting to see, because it would kind of suggest that there's a spiritual psychology that applies to other intelligent planets. That's a sort of universal trend.
There is a lot in common between Christianity and other religions.
Yeah.
So it's So why not?
So there could easily then be sort of universal principles that also these other civilizations have.
Yeah, when it comes right down to the basic message, the problem I see is that when we make things literal and fundamentalist in nature, regardless of what we believe, that's when we have problems. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that. No, that's a very good point. Thanks, Michael.
I think it's a great question, and I think that is a concept of true religion. And true religion would mean that it's true for everybody. So if there can be any kind of disagreements about anything, and it's just based on faith, it's open to interpretation, and everyone is interpreting things however they interpret things, and that cannot be truth. But something that is truth at all times for absolutely everyone in exactly the same way. There is no division, there is no choices for this one is good, that one is not good, that one is chosen, this one is not chosen. It applies in exactly the same way for every single being in the universe, regardless of where in the universe they are located. And when we find that particular religion, that is a true religion, and it's going to be the only one, because why else creating something else that is not true? I think this is why we're all called truth seekers. So once that truth is discovered, it's all the same for all.
Thank you. True religion, I like that.
Sophia, you've touched on what I think of as the tremendous religious promise of science. We have all these different world religions. They all have their own scriptures and their own traditions. They have different names for supernatural realms and different names for deities and gods. But every conversation we have, including this one, happens in natural physical reality. Beyond anything else, this is what we share across all of humanity. And science, the whole purpose of science is to look at natural physical reality and really look deeply into it and to ask it questions. And the data is the answers to those questions. And people from scientists and lay people from every religious tradition on the planet look at that same set of evidence, ask similar questions, and they debate it in a process called peer review until they agree on what it means, what is reality telling us about itself. So in a way, science is the only truly interfaith religion that covers all of humanity, because the truths it reveals are based on evidence that people with very different religious backgrounds look at and agree on together. So when you ask what religion might, what kind of theology might aliens have, if they have the ability to get here faster than the speed of light, they must have looked much more deeply into the nature of reality, physical reality, than we have, and learned things that we don't yet know. So and I'm a religious naturalist, so this is my bias coming out. I can only imagine that their religion would be this. What inspiration, spiritual inspiration they get from the intricacies and the nuances and the awesomeness of physical reality. And when I use the word spiritual, I use it the way Carl Sagan did. That spirituality doesn't mean, like you used it earlier and you said, well, maybe someone leaves the church and becomes an atheist and then they become spiritual again. Atheists are the most spiritual people I know, because they ask deep questions and they let the answers to those questions inform and enrich their lives. So, atheists often don't like that word spiritual, but in terms of finding meaningfulness and seeking what is profound and worthwhile, atheists are tremendously spiritual people, even though they resolutely disbelieve in anything supernatural.
Yeah, thank you. That is, I haven't heard it explained like that, but I do like that, and I recognize that in atheism. A lot of people kind of get into atheism because of the deep questions they ask about the religion that they were raised with, and they recognize things that are problematic or ethical philosophy issues about the character of God and the way that it's described, and that, in a sense, if they are debating something that might actually be relative and not a cosmically true concept, then that is heroic to question what is actually true, not just what has traditionally been interpreted. And in every age, there are pioneers and reformers that retake these questions to new levels, and that always creates. Sometimes it's so drastic that whole new sections of churches and groups are sort of forked off because they all sort of agree that there's something in a core development of understanding that is true and needs to be explored. So atheism is definitely it's an important part of religion as a whole. It's almost, like you said, a part of religion in and of itself, that line of questioning.
Yeah, I make a distinction between religion and religious. I am very religious, but religion, that word is often associated with belief in the supernatural.
Okay, right.
And I also want to clarify, atheists are not they're not a monolithic group. So you have your dogmatic atheists that have turned it into a religion. Richard Dawkins as an example. But then you have, the Religious Naturalist Association has a lot of members that I think probably more accurately would call themselves non-theists. They do not care whether there's a God or not, because there's so much richness in the natural world that I don't need to speculate about things that we can never answer. You know, the world's religions are never going to agree on the nature of God or what to call it or what God wants from us. But we can agree that there's something truly magical about the way that a blade of grass grows from a seed, as you were talking about earlier. It comes up in the New Testament all over the place.
Yeah. You wanna? Yeah. Please.
All planets are going to have limited resources because you're on a planet.
Mm-hmm.
What happens when we deplete these resources? Right. Every planet has to figure that out, regardless of how much more intelligent they are. Now, they have probably way better ideas, regardless of their spirituality. This is just a common core question, right? And then you go to my friend Tariq, who has this whole Mustafa. I always want to make him in The Lion King, and he's just not. And his whole thing is that, you know, we could solve all these problems if we could just, as a planet, agree on a core set of values. So whether you're coming from Christianity or you're coming from science, can we just agree that, like, war is really bad for the planet? Like, can we just agree that, like, we're not going to harm our babies? Those are our babies. So anything that we do, okay, but now you've harmed the babies. Can we start there? You know, so many other things, right? Can we just agree we're depleting resources faster than we're replenishing them? If we start there, then I think it's a very different conversation. Well, right, exactly. Or, like, what about the Mormons? Or what about it's like, okay, but, like, can we just agree on this? Because right now we can't even agree on that. And if we can't agree on that, why bother with the other?
Tariq is Pakistan.
The question that you are bringing up is, like, it's so powerful and it's so fundamental and it's heartfelt and it's very emotional. And a very interesting thing that as much as we can see that wars are really bad, there is something actually spiritual about the wars, and it serves purpose. And no, we don't want to die, and at the same time, the war is actually going on inside of us. And until we're going to resolve the war that is within us, the war will be expressed outwardly. So it's not about why can't we just agree? Well, yeah, we can agree, but inside of me, I am all pissed off and upset about stuff. So when we'll start honoring our own true nature and resolve the war within, the war that is expressed outwardly will, yes, exactly.
Yeah, I'll take back the mic and we'll do a little outro here. So, thank you everyone for participating in this discussion. I hope it was enlightening and enjoyable. And I do a podcast called Planetary HQ, and our goal is to be the planetary headquarters for all your celestial broadcast. So, you know, as you can see here, and thank you to JD for setting this up kind of last minute and saying, yes, let's put this on the schedule. And so, yeah, the channel, I have cards that I can hand out to you guys. You know, you might dive in and you might feel like it's a little more fringe than this conversation has been, but the core of our sort of message and what we want to get out to the people is what we call maybe a post-disclosure society. It's the conversations that happen after we all agree that, oh, we're not alone. And, you know, whether that information comes out in the next year or the next 50 years, hopefully not that long, it's still something that's interesting and I think valuable for personal growth. And that's our focus on the channel. So thank you everyone for participating. The divine in me recognizes the divine in you. And we will close it out. Let's have a great Wild Goose Festival for the next night, and then whatever is left for tomorrow. Thank you, everyone.